Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Leadership Conversation. I'm Yvette Owens of DestinySpeak, and I'm here with my colleagues and my business partner as we are going to share with you more about some perspective around the right finding the right place. I shared earlier this week, actually maybe yesterday, around how important it is if you really want to grow and maximize your potential. It's important to be in that right place. Last time we talked about having the right place within you, that inner peace, and that confidence, and how do you get that? And before that, we talked about passion. So tonight, we're talking about the right place, the right organization, the right group, the right movement, the right ministry. That how do you find those out? And as people are joining, we wanted to share more about who we are, so you know who you're spending time with every month on the second Thursday of every month. So again, I'm Yvette Owens of Destiny Speak, and we are looking to, and what we do is support leaders in building healthy cultures for people. If the culture is not conducive to people really being able to grow, be able to be authentic, be able to even share their goals and their visions, then they will not grow. It's not a healthy culture. And leaders have to be intentional about doing that. So that's what we do. And we also wanted to share with you some of the things we've done recently and what we have coming up. So I'm going to pass it over to my business partner, Edwina Cogdale, who will share some of the exciting things that we've done recently.
So thank you, Yvette. So a couple of things that we've done. We've partnered with the Employee Resource Group Leadership Alliance on a focus group this week to really look at how can we make employee resource groups more effective in the organizations. We also did a panel discussion, really exploring the impact that the pandemic has had on Black women in the workplace. So what we found is from that discussion, there's a lot of women leaving the workplace because of childcare issues and that type of thing, because all of a sudden children are at home, blurred responsibilities. They just can't, they can't function in both places. And the impact of that is that's really setting us back because we already don't have women in a lot of leadership positions. And if they start leaving the workplace, which they are doing, where does that put us? And what do organizations really need to do to help those women stay in the organization, stay in the workplace? So it's been an exciting time over the past couple of weeks.
Awesome. And what we have coming up, I am actually doing a leadership training for a group of leaders. And I mentioned organization, so that again spans the whatever type of organization you are. So we have a ministry that reached out and is looking to help their leaders gain some more momentum. So we're going to share with them our program called Realign, Reignite, and Run, which will help them to really get back around what their visions were, how they plug into the vision of that organization, how they can realign with that, and then what do they need to do to get going and running. Because, we've all been kind of sidetracked with 2020, and so we need to get that going again. So that's what Destiny Speak is doing. Again, we're sharing our contact information, it'll be scrolling throughout the night, so you'll know how to contact any one of us as we go through the conversation. And again, tonight's conversation is about the place, tagging yourself and joining with that organization, the right one that's going to help you flourish. So I'll pass it over to Delpha D. And if you want to share what you've been doing and what you have coming up, that would be great.
Sure. So my name is Delpha D. I'm with Delpha D LLC, and we're all about bringing your whole self to any environment and making sure that you're successful while keeping your whole self and integrity intact. And I think that's one of the things that's so important in today's day and age, especially now that everything's virtual. You could pretend to be somebody you're not, and I can tell you, you will burn out. So we help people make sure that they stay true to themselves, still get the message out, and really remain focused on who they are while delivering for others. So recently, actually published late last night, and I just kind of posted it on social media this morning. We had our latest blog post, and it's all about culture of perception. And just to give you a little bit, we all work in different environments. I have a day job. I love my day job. I love what I do here. But there's always a culture of perception. How you're seen matters. And I will tell you that blog post is not telling you to be somebody different to meet the perception in the culture that you're in. It's telling you stay true to yourself. Because we say a lot, hey, we want to see a change in a culture. We want to see a change at work. We want to see a change in our friends and family. It starts with you.
Yeah.
It starts
Awesome.
with you.
Awesome. And our friend David from Leadership by Design, and our colleague. Why don't you share with us what you've been doing lately and anything you have coming up?
Okay, yes, my name is David Gallagher, and I'm happy to be part of this group. And my business is Leadership by Design, LLC, focused on developing managers into better leaders, leaders with purpose, because it doesn't just happen. You need to have a purpose around it. Some of the things I focus on are, in addition to leadership coaching, would be leadership development workshops, quite a variety of them, as well as team facilitation, whether that's something like team building or whether that's helping a team improve their performance, whether that's helping them chart their course for a strategic direction. So one of the things I did, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, I did a webinar on building and maintaining trust at all levels in organizations. And how do you do that? How do you maintain it? What do you do if you lose it? How do you get it back? Etc. And we'll be hitting on a couple of those aspects today because culture drives a lot of that. And I'll have some comments if my colleagues don't mention them, that helps support that. A couple things I have coming up. I'm on the leadership committee with one of the chambers of commerce around in my geography, and so I'll be helping them out with a couple workshops in the coming months. So,
Awesome.
thank you.
And I just wanted to mention also, I forgot, I have a podcast called Company Culture with Yvette C. Owens. And tonight I'll be releasing this week's podcast. And it'll be on the cost of not accepting the assignment. So we all get assignments, but there's a cost when you don't accept it. And, you have to calculate that cost. And we'll be having some webinars too coming up. So tonight's topic is around leadership and the place, the organization. And we're going to take it from two perspectives: the individual trying to find the organization, the right ideal place for them to grow and really maximize their potential, and from the leadership perspective, because we've all mentioned around culture, how do you set an organization and a culture so that it is the ideal place for those people who are culture right? Those people who will really need to belong with you, and you belong with them, and you guys can do some phenomenal things together. So I wanted to first share with you, when we talk about ideal organization and the ideal environment, we often talk about communication, life balance, the ability to be able to learn and grow. Are we appreciated and celebrated, or are we just tolerated, right? So the ideal organization is one where we know that people are glad we walked through the door and that we showed up. And the colleagues, do we have great relationships with colleagues? Relationship in business or even in ministry or community movements is not just important with the external people you're trying to reach, but it's very important with the people that you're building the vision with. And then we talk about access to amenities especially when you're in corporations and companies and even ministries. What do they have in their facilities or in their offerings that work well with you and help you fill gaps or service you really well. And then, of course, the physical space and the building design, are you one more open to a really open concept where it's very comfortable and you feel like you're at home, or are you one prone to want to be in an office space in a cubicle or things like that? All those things are things that you should intentionally take into consideration. And the leadership approach, obviously, and I almost think that this should be top and not at the bottom of my list, because how leaders approach or leading that organization, managing, how they approach even treating the clients and the customers, how do they even approach developing the products, all really show that if it's an ideal place for you. And so let's talk. Any thoughts around that? And I'll just move from the slide a little bit before we move to the next piece. If anybody wanted to share. Yep.
I would add two things that come to mind. So I like your list, and I think the other thing that's becoming even more powerful these days, probably in the last few years, would be to what degree does the company provide support to their communities or charitable work? How are they making a difference in their communities? Are they giving back?
Right.
And a lot of our population these days really looks for a place that does that type of thing. And in addition to that, a big theme is the mission of the place, the organization, whatever that organization is it a mission that you can get behind and feel good about?
Right.
If it's hollow and we just want to make money, well, is that really something you can get your heart around? So.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the heart thing, because it's really talking about bringing the heart back into the organization, right? If you can't feel the heart there, then there's something not right. And if you know that people aren't really going after the right things, and we all know what the right thing is, and maybe we don't, maybe we need to that's why we need to bring the heart of the matter back, because some people have lost what the right thing is. Somebody else wanted to chime in. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Yvette, I was going to say two things. I agree with the heart comment, and I will expand upon it a little bit. It's about seeing your heart reflected on the place that keeps you there. And so it's not just that you see the heart of the place. Is it a good fit? Because it reflects you and who you are and what your values stand for. The other part is when you talk about the physical space, it's so interesting because today a lot of us are working from home because of coronavirus. And now there's all these articles about companies thinking about going back to the office or debating the idea of going back to the office. And I know I've had conversations with clients about maybe they don't want to go back.
Right.
Maybe they really like working from home. And how do you navigate that conversation with your employer if they determine that for them and their business, the best thing to do is go back at least part-time. But it's very interesting because that dynamic has shifted very quickly this past year.
Yeah, and from our perspective, when we talk about helping leaders create a better culture from, the work that we do from a DestinySpeak perspective, it's helping those leaders create that culture even remotely, right?
Yeah.
Because we are not in the physical space. So how do I make sure that my leaders are not over managing people, micromanaging people because of their insecurities, right? How do I create a culture that people still want to take that ownership and really capitalize on that ownership and make sure people are empowered to do what they're doing? How do we make sure they know we trust them? That's what we're talking about, right?
Well, there's two dichotomies. I had conversations with some folks and right before one call, the conversation ended with, and I sat on a call where they were questioning whether or not we're doing our work right because we're working from home, jumped on another call, and that person said, I'm so excited because I just left the meeting and they said we're doing a fantastic work from home. Right. And it's such a personal thing. And I want to make sure people are clear about, even in leadership space, sometimes your personal feelings and opinions get in the way. And I don't mean that poorly. I mean that they color or bias the decisions are made sometimes. It is our job as co-leaders in an organization to make sure that we're bringing out all of the perspectives. I think about the physical space as part of appreciating differences. And if you
Right.
really think hard about it, not everybody that can collaborate effectively needs to do it in person. Some
Absolutely.
people are much more effective virtually. And that's a lesson we've learned through this pandemic. How do you capitalize in that space to make sure that each employee is adding full value in a way that you feel comfortable as a leader, the organization is getting its maximization, and that employee is happy?
Right. Right.
Well, it all goes back to trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, even from David, when he talked about the webinar that he completed or is going to do, that trust relationship is everything. Because if you can't trust the people, then that creates an environment where, to your point, Yvette, there's this overseer kind of mentality
Mm-hmm.
where you think unless you're standing there towering over them, they're not doing what they need to do. So trust is huge. It opens the environment for employees to learn, to grow, and develop. So trust,
Absolutely.
huge.
Absolutely. And that means we have to, as a leader, make sure that we're confident, as Delpha was saying, confident in ourselves and able to troubleshoot when we need to, because some people just manage to avoid issues, and as opposed to just letting things happen and figuring out. And I don't mean carelessly, but
Mhm.
taking the risk to empower your people to be able to utilize their strengths and take ownership for the assignments. And so it can be a risk and it can be scary, as we're all saying, if you're not comfortable. And you have to really build that strength, that muscle, so you can get more comfortable. David, did you want to add anything else before I go to the next?
It's one of the points I made is uh, it's close to being a waste of time to try to focus on anything else in your organization if there's not a ground floor of trust between everybody. And there's a lot of things you can do to create that trust and improve it. But it's just like culture. It's never done.
Right. Right. And I shared with a client today, you have to make sure you're in a position where you can be above and continue to see forward. Because if you're not looking forward, then we're stumbling forward. So you have to be able to glance and be able to see forward so that, and that means you can't be down in the weeds. And that's what's making a lot of our leaders tired. They're down in the weeds and they're trying to be doers as opposed to be the visionary and lead. And so that's great conversations. I wanted to share, because we've talked a lot over our last 3 months about culture. And I think that's because we all have such a passion around making sure people are in a healthy place where they can really feel comfortable and also comfortable in being challenged, right? Because as long as I'm challenged in a healthy way, then that's where the growth comes. I'm not going to grow if I'm challenged and beaten down or never challenged at all and I'm just always comfortable. But where can I be stretched? Then it's a safe place to be stretched. So when we talk about culture, we're really talking about the communication styles, how people get things done, how they share when change is happening, how they share what's coming up, how they involve people to even get change to happen, we talked about how they reward people when things are going well. All that's a part of communication that strengthens your organization or your team. Then there's performance, focusing and engagement, and we talked about the trust. Then how are decisions made? Is there a process for making decision? Is that process too laborious that makes it so hard for people to get any decision? And by the time you get the decision made, the world has totally changed upside down. Or on the flip side, are you being too quick to make decisions and not giving time for the right level of information to come in so that you can make the right informed decision? So how decisions are made, and then the atmosphere. We talked about context, professionalism. Does everyone feel equal? And is there equality in the group? And then team approach. Are they inclusive? Is it collaborative? Do we leave certain people out because we don't value them? How do you really value the members on the team? Does everybody on that team, and I spoke to a different client today, does everybody on that team know that everyone's depending on them filling their role and they're being held accountable, as well as being celebrated individually? I said to her, too often we go with this team mentality. So when things go well, we say the team did well. Well, that person who really did the work on the team is like, hello? I'm the one that contributed most. So how do we have a real balance in celebrating the team as well as the individual contributors in their role, doing that? And then structure. What's the hierarchy? Is it allowing you to have that fluidity that you need and receive feedback? Because feedback truly is something that we need to make sure we're on track. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues to share their insight around culture.
Yvette, you made a point just now around the balance of the culture of team versus honoring the individual and their work. Gosh, how do you get through that when we teach leaders be selfless, and selflessness equals team first? And then we teach people, don't take credit. We say, give the team the credit. And yet we provide performance feedback individually. Not necessarily, we do to the team, right? But if you work in any company, you get paid for the performance and the performance of the company. Sometimes if you're getting paid for your performance, that's your performance. And yet there's this dichotomy of truth about your performance versus that expectation of being the team player.
Yeah, and so here's the thing. Everybody on the team has a role.
Yeah.
So when we acknowledge their role and recognize that that role is critical to our success, to the outcome that we're desiring, then you can still, if everybody's doing their role that helped us get to the outcome, that's the team acknowledgement and celebration. But when I want to say we were able to get there because quality engineers were doing a fantastic job and they really caught these things, or if it's in the industry of restaurant industry, the preps, they really were on time with doing the prepping and the work, and different things like that. To get something out the door, a salesperson, well, the person who really put the proposal together, it was clean and crisp, so that when I went out to present my sales to the client, it was on point. I had everything there. That's how we recognize I didn't get to this outcome by myself if we're working in a team. So we celebrate each role, but at the same time that we celebrate as a team, we were able to bring it all together and bring it home.
Well, and I'm thinking too, just to add this in, sometimes I think there's a confusion between a team and a work group. Mm-hmm. And they are not the same thing. So
they're not.
A team there's some interdependencies in a team. In a work group, we're just all sitting here together doing our thing. So, I have to go to a sports analogy when I think about a team. So, we just watched the Super Bowl a couple of days ago. And to your point, Yvette, everybody has a certain role that they're playing. And there is an interdependency. If the quarterback doesn't throw the ball properly, then the receiver can't get the ball. And they all win together and they all lose together. Mm-hmm. So I think we have to go to that point, because for one thing, you'll see when teams are successful, it's the team. But if they're not, most of the time it goes down to an individual. Well, this person didn't do this. So I think we have to be clear as far as what we're calling a team and what is truly just a work group.
And you know what? The underlying part of this is avoid the culture of blame, because
Right.
it's going to drive people out, and it's also going to break that team relationship.
Right.
Culture of blame is terrible.
Yeah, and
Again,
when we
that takes trust. That takes
Hmm.
trust to be able to say, I was in a group at one point, and it was a pretty high productive team, and we talked about, we in a room, we went around the room and said, to each individual, someone had to say, "Here's how you contribute to the team,"
mm,
and then the next thing you had to do was say, "Here's how you derail the team."
ah,
And
that's
that
Mm.
good.
takes trust to be able to have those kind of discussions. That came from the five dysfunctions of a team. I can't remember who the author is, but
Hmm.
Mm.
that's the whole point of getting it out. And that way you can help people. But that means you have to have trust already there. So
Right.
people are giving you feedback, but you feel like, because I trust that they want the best for me, this is why I'm able to receive it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us more, Edwina, about the work group piece? I think you made it really great and clear a point about the team. Tell us more about that work piece, that work group piece.
So, have you ever been in a work group where everybody's doing their own thing, but they all report up?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, think about people on a bus. We're all on the bus. I guess could be considered a group, but you're getting off here. I'm getting off here. You know what I'm saying? There's no interdependency. I could do my job with you or not. You
Right.
don't. You have no piece in what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
But a team, there's interdependencies. I can't
Gotcha.
get what I need to get done without you.
Gotcha.
And
And with
so,
a, go ahead,
I'm
David.
sorry. I'm sorry. So to continue with your sports analogy, Edwina, we've all seen those athletes, whether they were amateur athletes or professional athletes, that seem to be in it for themselves and their own publicity and so forth. They're not in it for the team. They want their own, recognition, like uh, I'm old school, so the dancing in the end zone thing. It's like, don't act like you've never been there before. But anyway,
I say the same thing, David. I'm more of a Jerry Rice player.
yeah,
Mhm.
yep.
You never saw Jerry Rice in the end zone doing any of this.
Barry,
Because
Barry
that's just
Sanders
not
gave
his
the same
style.
advice to some running backs. He said, "Act like you've been there. Don't be making all kinds of." But
Yeah.
anyway, so to the point, there's the same thing in an organization. If a leader or an individual is all about themselves and not about the work team that they're working with and those interdependencies, then that's going to stick out. The team might struggle because of that, because I obviously don't care about what the three of you do. I'm more in it for myself, my own recognition, and no one's holding me accountable for that from a cultural standpoint. So you go
Mm-hmm.
back to what Yvette said at the very beginning about, not only do you hold people accountable, you hold everybody accountable. And
Mm-hmm.
because the problem sometimes is, well, wait a minute, why does Yvette or Edwina or Delpha get away with that? That's not our culture.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but look how strong they are. They bring in the most sales, or they make the most money. They deliver great publicity for our business or organization. You pick a metric for whatever organization you're in, whatever you measure, and because I've heard that in various groups of different types, where, well, yeah, but we'll give Edwina a break because we're not going to hold her accountable for this behavior that does not match up with our culture because
Yeah.
she's so successful in these other things. It's not appropriate.
No, it's not. And then and that's the quickest way to bring people down, because it's like, oh, well, I can now relax in some areas because people are getting, and I'm not saying we shouldn't give people grace, but we should be very, very careful, right? And I just wanted to go back to the working group. That working group can end up at some points becoming a team if they have to fill in for someone, right?
Yeah.
But to Edwina's point, for the most part, I can do my assignments, I can do my role without really integrating with someone else, and I can be successful in that. And so leaders need to know the difference and how to work the difference and how to lead people in the different environments. Go ahead, Delpha.
I was going to say, for me, thematically, is being a grateful and gracious leader. You can be grateful for your team, grateful for the opportunities. The team can be successful, but you're also very gracious about how you give the feedback if it's tough feedback, or the positive reinforcement if it's good reinforcement. And if you just stick to those two words, grateful and gracious, it'll
Yeah.
get you a heck of a lot further. And you won't even have to worry about what in your individual how you're viewed. You won't even have to worry about that, because what people will see is this grateful, gracious person that
So
has a team that delivers.
So I had a question today from a client that said, how do you motivate people when when they're not taking ownership? How do you motivate people to take ownership in a space? And again, tonight's topic for those who might be just joining us is finding that ideal space if you're someone joining an organization, and if you're a leader, how do you create that space? How do you make sure you're creating a culture in a space that really people will find ideal for them to really maximize their potential and maximize their contribution to the organization? So, someone was, again, the question was, how do you motivate those people who really haven't taken ownership and want to take, don't seem to
I
want to take ownership?
I'm going to be really passionate about this, and I'm going to say, stop leading with ownership being a negative thing. Lead and have them own the good stuff. If you have them own the good stuff and you give them credit for the good stuff, they'll own the bad stuff eventually. But what happens is, in any organization, people say ownership. We do feedback as a gift. Own your feedback. Well, that it has a negative connotation, because generally feedback is negative. If you really sit down and think about it, we don't do the positive reinforcement enough. So I enjoy when I see folks change their habits of saying, I want you to own this. Well, I want you to own my good stuff, right? So instead of asking them for ownership, ask them to own the good stuff first. The rest will come. But again, it goes back to trust, right? How can I trust you when you're telling me to own something if you never own the good things I do?
Yeah, and I think she was explaining that she's done that, but
Hmm.
these people were just so not motivated. And she said she did share that there are examples where you really try to get with the person and see what's going on, right? Because something could be going on with them that's not causing them to really connect. And if we can do that and if it's not the right fit for where they are, whether it's a work group or a team, what is it that they really do want to do, and what's their ideal place, right? So that we can potentially help influence them to get to that place. Because honestly,
Yeah.
everybody may not be a good fit for what you're doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it also goes back to, like Delphi mentioned, the trust, but also accountability. They go hand in hand. So you got to hold people accountable, but they also need to understand what the expectations are,
Yes.
and they do need to own things. But I remember a couple of conversations I've had with people over the decades where I say, okay, Delphi, you don't seem like you're engaged with this. Well, tell me more about that. What's going on? Uh, when I look at and point at certain behaviors, when I say that I'm not sure that you're excited to be here or excited to be in this role, am I off base? If I am, great. If I'm right on, tell me more about that. What's going on? Is this a fit for you or not? Um, which, by the way, gets to another topic for perhaps another day. But people hiring for cultural fit all the time. That makes sense to a degree, but if you go overboard, then you hire more people just like yourselves.
You've just
And
hired a bunch of lemmings.
yep, and you don't get diversity. You don't get diversity of thought, let alone other aspects of diversity. And if you really want to be innovative, you need to be open to other ideas and other perspectives.
Absolutely. When I think about motivating people, there's two types of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic. And it's really hard to create intrinsic motivation in people. It has to be there.
Right.
And to David's point, if it's not there, it's hard for someone outside of that person to create it. So I had written down on my notes, David, accountability, which doesn't have to be negative.
No.
It's both, right? Accountability, and you will keep hitting yourself up against a wall trying to motivate somebody to do something that's not in them to do.
Right.
So I always called it, from my leadership perspective, let me help you find the right place for you.
Yes. Yes.
And that gets back to the crux of what we're talking about. If it's truly the lack of intrinsic motivation, then is there something going on in your life? Okay, let's talk about that to the degree that it's not too personal, but let me help you out. Let me understand. Let me help develop you as well if you want to be developed. I've seen too many situations where, oh yeah, Yvette's not doing her role properly. So, okay, I just focus on that. I don't focus on developing her, which is actually a positive thing. But if we realize together in our conversation that, oh, so in your heart of hearts, this is not a place for you. You don't feel like you're part of the place. You don't feel like you belong. You cannot get behind the mission of this place or the culture. If I can help you with that, is there an obstacle? Let's talk through some of that. But if you decide at the end of the day that this is not the place for you, that's okay.
Yeah.
Let me help you find a place that does work for you, whether it's at this or in this organization or some other organization.
Yeah.
And that's a great segue to the next question that I have for the group, because we talked about culture being, and I'll just bring that slide up again. This is culture, right? Communication, performance, decision making, atmosphere, team, approach, structure, communication, right? But when I'm on the outside trying to join something new, we don't necessarily train people or show people how to do that research to be able to make sure that where I'm going or what I'm looking for, how do I find it and uncover it? How do I discover it when I'm when I'm going out to organizations? So let's talk about that, because there could be many people listening to this or on the replay. And by the way, for those who are listening, thank you for joining us. You can leave your comments and we will definitely answer your questions, and we will definitely answer them tonight or even after the call. But there could be many people here looking, all right, I hear I'm where I am. All right, I'm where I am, but there's something else in me. There's someplace else. I know that where I am is good, or it could even be great, but it may still not be my ideal place. So how do we discover that? How do we find those places?
So let me ask you a question. I have answers to that, but I don't want to get in Delpha's or Edwina's way either. So if we were to focus on an organization that employs people, and we want to get a job there or a role. I don't usually call them jobs, but we want to get a role there. When does my experience from the outside start with understanding the culture?
So, David, I will tell you what I tell all of my brand new, coming out of college, and then I'll tell you what I tell my people that have been in business for a long time and they're looking for a shift. So coming out, I always recommend to read through job descriptions and find something that inspires you. Their words matter in those job descriptions, and it'll tell you a lot about the culture, the way those job descriptions are written. If you read through LinkedIn, read through Indeed, and what you'll find is that the energy of the place is listed. And so I'll give you an example. I had somebody come in and they wanted to do work in the cyberspace, not software, not hardware, cyberspace work, which is very different. And they came in and they had like the standard companies are hiring for those jobs. And all of them sounded very, very corporate, very, delineated. But she was excited by one that's a smaller company that was where we are a fun place to work. We like energy. We share our ideas. And so they were explaining their value in that job description. That's what attracted her to that job. That's one way to start identifying the culture. My feedback to her was find them on LinkedIn, start reading their articles to understand what they're publishing, start following people that work in that place and start reading what they're publishing. Those things are going to tell you the who and the what of that place. And then also talk to the recruiter. And one of the questions I always want people to ask a recruiter is, tell me about the culture. Why do you like working there? And once they're done giving you the company line, because they're going to give you the company line, they all practice that, ask them, but what about you? Why are you here doing this job today? That'll tell you a lot about the place.
Yep.
For my people that have been there for a while, and some of them might be looking to jump from one executive job to another, passion is a little bit different. They want to feel fully inspired in a place where they can make a change and feel extremely engaged around the culture and the vision and mission of the place. Follow the CEO. That's a very different type of follow. If you really think about it, if you're brand new, you've never worked, following a CEO is a little bit hard because they're going to be high vision, high philosophy, high engagement. But follow that CEO and follow their team. Get to
Great.
know some of the things that they're reading.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Anybody else?
So yeah, so it starts. I agree completely. It starts as soon as I start to research a company, whatever that research is. All the things that Delpha mentioned, even looking at the company's website, which most companies have a website. So, and how much of that is true? How much of that is putting out a face? If you talk about the CEO and his or her vision and what's important to him or her, does it translate down to the front line? So I'm asking everybody I interview with, describe the culture to me. What gets rewarded? What doesn't get rewarded? What are the written rules, the spoken rules? Okay, great. That's good to hear. Now, what are the unwritten rules and the unspoken rules? What am I going to stumble across and it's going to hurt me? Tell me those things now, because those things sometimes don't come out early on in the relationship, because I've seen that so many times. It's like, oh, by the way, we don't do that here, Edwina. Okay, so, oh, well, I wish I would have known. I've been here for 6 months now. So I pepper, because you're looking for consistency of answers to all those questions. If you interview with 5 people, I want to hear a theme that's consistent between the 5 of them. If I bump into a couple people in the hallway, I want to make sure that I'm hearing some of the same types of commentary. And if I heard something with the 5 people I interviewed, but then I go next to the work team or work group that I'm going to work with, to use Edwina's phrases, which are accurate, then the greatest thing to do would be interview with my potential peers and ask them the same questions.
Yeah, I think you bring up the great point about its quantity and consistency. So you're talking to as many people as you can, because the points that both of you brought up is that there's that company line that people will really make sure comes forth, and that some of them, that's all they say, even though they know there's so much more going on. So really talking to as many people as you can at different levels and different roles, and listening for the consistent conversation that's happening throughout, and how do you and really getting to the authenticity of what they're saying.
Well,
You
you
go
gotta
ahead.
realize though, it's you can do your best due diligence. And I agree with what everything Delphin and David is saying. But it's just like a marriage. You don't know until you get there.
Right.
And just because it works for other people, you have to experience it yourself.
Yeah, I'll tell you all the right things in the courtship.
Yes, because we're dating, right? You
And
didn't
that's,
know that those socks were going to constantly be on the floor.
Exactly.
yes,
And with that said, the research and everything that we've talked about is critical, because too many people are not even doing that. And at
Right.
least you're better informed when you join the organization. But to Edwina's point, there's so much more when you get there. So don't be blindsided by it. That's the key. Because I've worked with different people, especially once they've come into the organization and they've come for my help, and it's like, this is not what I thought this was supposed to be. And so you want to make sure that, okay, no, Dorothy, you're not in Kansas anymore. So, so it's like, how do it's okay. So how it's just, adjust to it and then make sure you are now ready to make your mark or find your place. And again, that gets back to the inner space that we talked about last time in the organizational place that you're in.
And managing perceptions, right? So I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the speaker talked about, I tell my kids, if we start something, whether it's soccer or whatever, you will finish the season. And it's really important for folks to not just give a place 90 days. You may think at 90 days that this is not the place for me. You haven't learned the place. You haven't learned the people. You're still trying to figure out motivation.
Right.
Give a place a year. It looks better on your resume, and at the same time, you're probably going to walk away learning something. And it may very well be that what you're learning is that you actually really love the place because you found the heart. Places are like people. They're guarded, and it takes a little bit of time for them to open up to you. Your recruiter, to David's point, that's your date with the steak and the lobster. All right. Then they make you the offer. That's the dessert. And now you have to decide whether you're going to walk into that restaurant again. And when you do, you may get a different server.
Yeah. And the key to all of this, I think, is knowing who you are and what's your ideal, knowing what you want, what are your values. And we talked about all of that in previous broadcasts. I have to be clear on what my ideal place is, what it is that I'm going after, so that when I come in there, I know what I'm looking for. I spoke to someone this week also that said, she's moved to a new place within a year because she wasn't seeing what she was looking for. And she was like, well, maybe some might say I'm jumping too fast, but I knew that wasn't the place. That's because she is very strong and very confident in what she wants and what she needs to get to where she wants to be. So she can make that assessment, and she did give it a year, but she was not seeing what she needed to, and so she made the switch. And so the more you are sure about what you're going after and what you want to see and where you want to be, and what you're willing to do, am I willing to still contribute? Can I still effectively be a key role player in this space that I'm in as I'm working towards where I want to go? Then it could be a good fit. But if it's not, then you need to, as everyone's saying, give it the time so you can really uncover. But the more I know what I'm looking for going in, the better off I'm going to be able to make that decision rather quickly.
Reminds me of one of my two sons. They both loved football and played football for quite a number of years. One into college, but the one before I started coaching them, along with some other fathers. My one, it was his first year. He was 11. Everybody else in the team had been playing for 2 or 3 years already, and he never played before. And it was his decision to go try out for the team. Well, there's no tryouts at that age, but anyway, to join the team. And he, a few weeks or a month in, maybe it was a few weeks, he said, okay, I don't understand this. I'm not getting it. I want to quit. And I said, okay, you can quit at the end of the season. Mm-hmm. I said, but you're going to stick it out. This was your decision. You don't give up on things like that. Right. And it's kind of like joining a new organization where it's like, okay, everybody else knows what they're doing, but I don't. I can't even, and the bigger a place is, the harder it can be to navigate, especially if it's a matrix kind of environment. uh, and it's highly collaborative, which are wonderful organizations. But it's like I've got to figure all this out, and I'm not used to that. So that's another reason for your points about giving it some time and ask questions and so forth.
Before we
Absolutely, absolutely. Culture is how things get done around here, right? So you've got to learn the language. It's no different than moving to a foreign country. You know, when you
Mhm.
first get there, you don't know the language. You don't know what time people eat. You know, if you move to France, maybe they don't eat at 4 o'clock. Maybe they eat at 8 o'clock. So you have to get an understanding of what it takes to succeed there and how the culture really operates. And a lot of times you just cannot get that until you're actually dropped in it.
So before we wrap up tonight, I wanted to touch base on decision making from the leader's perspective and how that impacts the culture, because I think decision making kind of wraps in many of those things that we talked about from a culture, what's important from a culture perspective. So let's talk about the importance of the process, the framework, how decisions are made, and we can couple that with even how they're communicated. But let's talk about the importance of that from the leader's perspective in setting, contributing to a healthy culture.
Oh, you asked the heavy question.
Well, let me start
Yeah,
because
go ahead.
I was in a conversation with a potential client last night, and they're coming together as a partnership. However, and everybody's contributing, right? But there is one person who is sitting in those meetings and making and agreeing with the decisions that are made, but then can change the decisions and feels like he can do that because of his role not only in the business but outside of the business in connection with the other partners. So, you know, decisions, if we're going to, we have to agree, I think, as leaders on how decisions will be made. And we have to honor the decisions that are made. And if we feel that there needs to be a change, we have to have a way to come back to the right people who were in the original decision to say why we need to maybe shift or do something different. I think we owe that to people to do that. Now, we can have people from a decision making perspective say, very like, I'm authoritative, I make decision, y'all can contribute, I can hear you and everything, but I'm the one that's going to make this decision. Then there's people who can't make a decision and until they talk to, or won't, they can, but they won't until they talk to 1,000 people. And people around them are like, can somebody just make a decision? So there's a balance there, right? And we've all seen it. So give me your thoughts around that.
So, you know, there's different methods of making decisions. And a lot of times, whether it's voting by votes, you know, all in favor, vote aye, you know, or put your
Mm-hmm.
secret ballot up there. There's like so many different types of decision making. And there are times as a leader where you do have to be that person, that autocratic person that says, here's what we're going to do. And I have to make this decision for the following reasons.
Right.
And then there's other times where you can hear other people. It just depends on what's going on, right? When I think about it. But I
I
love
think,
the fact that it's part of the culture as far as like, how are we going to make decisions as our group?
Right.
yep, I do the whole this is negotiable. We can all talk about it and we can make this decision as a collaborative group. And then these things are not negotiable. So I will need to make some decisions. I'm happy to hear you, but I own the decision making on this because whether it's me and the responsibility for my team or some other factor that requires me to be the decision maker. But being clear up front
Mm-hmm.
sets the tone for the group. And I like to do it, most times it's a collaborative decision with my teams. Once in a while, it needs to be a directive decision because it just needs to happen that way. And I'll explain the why. And then I always give room for the grieving process because some decisions cause grief,
Mm-hmm.
and let them talk about it. And I tell them, you got 10 minutes. Let's just hash it out. Tell me how wrong this is. I hear you. This still needs to happen. This is why it needs to happen. When you're done, we're going to work on how we're going to make it happen.
And what you said about the why is so critical.
Yeah.
Whether I'm communicating to the rest of the organization about where we're heading, okay, that's great. Why are we heading there? But also, if we're making a decision, if the four of us are making a decision, along with anybody else who's listening right now, um, let's hear all your perspectives. I do want to hear them. And if I say I like a little piece of what you said, a little piece of what you said, and you said, and here's why, and here's kind of I think here's the final decision that kind of incorporates the best of all of our ideas. And by the way, I worked with alongside several leaders like that, and we used to have a saying that we can debate each other all day long, either in your office or my office or as a group in the conference room. But when we leave here, we are all saying the same thing. We're speaking the same words because that's how you drive culture.
Yeah.
If the four of us agreed on something and said, here's how we're going to talk about it, and I say it officially, but then you hear me at the water cooler saying something else to somebody, it's like I've just shot the culture. I'm not only that, but now people are wondering, oh, so you folks aren't really together from a leadership team standpoint, are you? No, So.
Yeah.
Well, and it doesn't bode well for whatever the company is. If on your example, I will tell you that more often than not, somebody that deviates from the plan feels like they're losing something. And
Right.
identifying what they feel that they're losing is generally the best solution to getting them back on board.
Well, you're right, and in this scenario, it really is more role clarification
Yep.
and people understanding that in
Or they're
this
losing
scenario.
power. When you
Right.
merge with another group, you lose power.
Exactly. And I like what you guys have been saying is sometimes I have to make a decision. And I've seen leaders, I've even said it myself. Okay, I'm going to make this executive decision because it needs to be announced sometimes so people know what's happening, because some people still hear the conversation that just happened about where you were asking them for their input, and then if you go a different direction, then they totally miss the fact that okay, I have to now make this decision because maybe I have information that I couldn't divulge, and I need to, based on that, plus what you're saying, I need to make this decision. So sometimes it's good to announce, all right, I heard you, I have to make this executive decision and move forward from there. This is great information. And I know I asked from a leadership perspective, but just on if you're not the leader, I've often coached people in this perspective. Your job only is to give them the information so they can make an informed decision. But don't be so wed to what that outcome of their decision will be, because you'll get hurt more than not, often than not. If you're like, okay, I gave you this information and you're going to say this, you can't do that. Just know that you did a really good job in giving them all the information that you could give them so that they can make an informed decision. But the outcome of that decision, that leader owns. And so when I share that with folks that I work with, it relaxes them and says, yeah, I did, because they're wed to what the outcome, as opposed to I did my part in making sure they had the information. How they interpret that information, how they twist it, whatever they do with it is on them. But you brought the information to them that they could make an informed decision. Any other comments around that before we wrap up?
I think we only have a minute, so we should probably wrap up, I guess.
Awesome. So thank you all for joining. Again, if you have questions, you can put them in the comments. I know this is sharing. We've shared it on LinkedIn. We've shared it on Instagram, on Facebook. So on YouTube, we will respond to those comments and questions. And we'll be back next month talking about power. So please join us. We're here every second Thursday. Join us for the conversation around power. I again want to thank my business partner, Edwina, my colleagues, Delpha and David, for joining us tonight. It's always a pleasure to spend this time with you all. Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.